Good evening, everyone. My name's Laura Malone, and I'm going to be your host today. Looks like we've got 121 people registered for this webinar, so I'm really excited to be sharing this work with you. I'm here with Anne and Joel Isaacs. They're the trainers in Bodynamics. Go ahead and wave, you guys. Joel, you might want to come off mute. And so here's what we're going to do today. We're going to have an overview of Bodynamics. What's the theory? What's the practice? So you can get a sense of it. We'll do some experiential exercises so you can get a feel for what it might be like in your body. We'll be providing some examples and case studies. Then we'll have a Q&A session and talk about upcoming learning opportunities if your appetite has been whetted.
So Laura,
yeah,
I'm only seeing you.
Yes, that's right.
Right.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now so we can walk through the presentation. Okay, so this is me. I'm a coach and I use Bodynamics extensively in my coaching. About 70% of my practice is comprised of coaches. I have been doing body work of one kind or another since a long time ago when I was certified as a radix practitioner, which is a form of emotional release body work. And in fact, that's how I met Anne and Joel decades ago. I'm a certified integral coach at New Ventures West, where I'm on the adjunct faculty, and I also supervise people who are either new coaches or having trouble getting certified. I'm certified with the Strozzi Institute as somatic coach, and I'm on the faculty of the Alethea School of Integral Unfoldment. So I've trained in Bodynamics, both in the kind of training you're going to hear about today and also in shock trauma work. This is Anne. She's been a Bodynamic analyst and trainer since 1993. She has a private practice in LA, and she is a teacher and workshop leader with a number of institutions, including the Esalen Institute, the California School of Integral Studies, JFK, others. One of the unique contributions that Anne has brought to Bodynamics is she's done extensive training in attachment work. So she brings the work of Diane Fosha and others into the model and has innovated with that. She's done a lot of training in working with trauma, SCT, and she has a body-based Buddhist practice. She studied with Julie Henderson and now with Terry O'Fallon and Kim Barta. This is Joel. He's the director of the Bodynamic Institute, and he's in private practice too in LA. In fact, they're sort of a team. He's been training people in Bodynamics for 25 years. He too has led workshops at Esalen and was on the adjunct faculty at Santa Barbara Graduate Institute. And one of the things about Joel is that he's really an innovator. So after he was certified at the Radix Institute, he wasn't satisfied with what he had learned, and he evolved it into his own approach, which he called Core Contact, and then trained and certified 4 classes. And then he's also done the same thing with Bodynamics. He's innovated it in such a way that it can be used quickly by people who are already trained in some verbal methodology. And he's done quite a bit of writing, published 8 articles on body psychotherapy. So here's what you can expect to get today. You'll get a general understanding of the theory and approach of Bodynamics. And in summary, what it's about is how psychological and physical abilities develop in parallel and affect each other in children. You'll learn about the 7 stages of psychomotor development and some of the abilities that are learned during those stages in childhood, and what happens in the body and way of being when healthy development isn't supported. You'll learn something about how Bodynamics uses themes to developmental stages so that you can understand where your clients are stuck or where you may be stuck too. And some fundamental somatic distinctions that will impact your relationship with your clients. So if you have a particular disruption in your development, how that affects how you show up with your clients, as well as, of course, how you can recognize disruptions in your clients. So our hope is that you will see yourself or your clients in some of the distinctions we share and sense how this could be helpful in your understanding of them and of yourselves, and that you'll feel curious to learn more. So why work with the body? This is probably, if you're not already a somatic therapist or coach, this is a question that you might be in. And when your clients are showing up and talking to you about what they're struggling with, their body is expressing it. The issue is showing up in the present, in their bodies. And we once really understood that the mind-body connection, and you can see it in our language: keep a stiff upper lip, don't lose your head. She looks down her nose at him. These all reflect actual things that we do and experience in our bodies. So Bodynamics was originally developed for therapists as a somatic psychotherapy, but it works very well for coaches and even body workers. And the reason is because it's present-centered, so it's not so much about looking to understand the past as it is understanding how issues are showing up for your clients in the present. It's skills-based, so it's about learning new things rather than focusing on what's wrong. And it's about embodying a new way of being by learning missing abilities. It also develops present skills in you as a practitioner. And it's useful on the other side for body workers because it will give you the psychological lens with which to view what you're seeing going on in the bodies of your clients. So why use Bodynamics? Well, it will help you to more confidently and accurately recognize the patterns in your clients and know how to work with them. So I want to give you a brief example of how this showed up in a client who came in and said to me, this is a new client, and he said, I've done so much work on myself. I can sense my body. I generally feel good, but I'm always in an us versus them relationship with people, and I don't understand why. It's like I don't know what I don't know. So we explored his history. He was Ukrainian, and so he was living in a rather dangerous situation, and his parents were also overprotective and narcissistic and wouldn't let him separate from them. So I recognized this as a boundary issue, and I worked with his muscles and his energy so that he could feel both his physical and his energetic boundary. And he started to relax, and he said, now I understand. I was always trying to get boundaries by fighting, and now I realize I can have a boundary without fighting. So you can use the body to develop new awareness and abilities like setting limits, and others like reaching out, and it becomes much more concrete. So when a cognitive approach isn't working, when you've hit a wall in your therapy or coaching and talking about it just isn't getting you anywhere, or when your client isn't following through, they're saying they're going to do something and then they just can't get themselves to do it, Bodynamics can be very useful. Okay, so now Joel is going to give us an overview of the history and background of Bodynamics.
Hi. Let's see. The Bodynamic work was developed by 12 Danish therapists. They worked together for over 20 years. They worked collectively. Sometimes they even shared income. I met them when they were about 10 years into it in the 80s, and they were just putting things together in a deeper way. They had worked to discover the psychological function of each muscle. And the way they approached it was to first observe children, and they looked at child motor development, and they tracked the age range during which a muscle comes under voluntary control, which means that the child can choose to use it. We see a baby moving a lot, but those are involuntary movements. As the child develops, they can consciously do a movement repeatedly when they have the impulse to do it. So this is what was coming online, and they wanted to correlate it with the psychological development that was happening in the child. They did this for a while till they got a pretty good idea of it. And then what they did was in-depth research with adult clients. So how did they do that? They analyzed 10,000 reports from client and therapist. So in each session, the therapist and client each would write what muscle was used, what impulses or skills came forward, what age range seemed to be developed. And doing this, they correlated the muscle with the psychological function it evoked. Now, Bodynamics is both a model, and you'll see a lot of that today, how all this information is put into a model, but it's a method for doing work with clients to change their behavior in areas they want to. We talk about developing resources. Now, resources are skills or abilities, simple ones where a child learns early on. They can push away when they had enough food. They can pull things toward you when they want something. They can go after what they want when they're mobile. These skills emerge as the muscles come under voluntary control, and the psychological ability that corresponds is also obtained. So our bodies contain resources that are either available or missing depending on whether we were supported by our caregivers. If the caregiver experience was good enough for us, then we have those abilities and we're probably healthy in that stage. And one of the wonderful things about Bodynamics is it allows us to use specific muscles to directly access abilities that were previously unavailable and that are related to the issues we're working on with our clients. Again, some of these abilities, and there are many of them, setting limits, knowing what you want, how you feel, what your impulses are, seeing others accurately, expressing opinions, things like that. And you want to go ahead now?
Oh, I thought this, okay. So I thought we were doing a warm-up. I'm just a little confused.
Yeah, I skipped over that, so.
You want to go back to that?
We could.
I think
Yeah. All right, why don't I do that? Okay, so let me spotlight myself in that case. We are coaches and therapists. We are not technicians, so please bear with us as we deal with some of the technical issues around this webinar. So what I'd like to ask you to do, we're going to be doing this standing up. So you want to turn up the volume on your speakers. And if you're using a headset, for the time being, unplug it so that you can step away from your computer and then come to standing position. And I'm going to walk you through a warm-up. Okay, can everybody see me?
Yes.
Awesome. So stand with your feet about shoulder width apart and take a moment just to close your eyes and sense your body. Take a couple of deep breaths. And just notice, what can you sense? Is there tension? Is there energy or streaming? Are there places in your body that feel blank or empty? Can you feel your feet? Can you rest into your legs? Now open your eyes and just look around the room. Actually let your head move as you look around the room. So you're using muscles for orienting when you do this. So really see what's here in this space that you're in. And then we're going to do a little grounding. So what I want to invite you to do is just bring your weight onto the left sides of your feet. Then over to the right. And then back and forth a few more times. Onto your toes. Onto your heels. Squeeze your toes as if you're trying to pick up a piece of Kleenex with your toes. And then stretch them, lift them up to try to point them towards the ceiling. And then bounce into your knees, gently. Stop for a minute and notice if you sense anything different in your legs and feet. Now press your knees out towards the walls at your sides. So you're activating your IT band. This is an important muscle for boundaries. Hold it there and relax. And do it again. And relax. And now press your knees together so you're activating the insides of your thighs. And relax. And hold. And relax. So for me, that particular move is very centering. I feel more energy along my center line. Now raise your hips like you're marching without moving. This activates your mid-back muscles. And then swing, like I'm doing here. So your arms flop side to side, you're facing forward, and you're loosening up your whole spine. When we're tight in these muscles, we tend to hold on to our opinions too rigidly. And finally, pat your skin all over. Pat your face, back of your head, neck, down one arm, the other. Really feeling your skin as you're doing this. Pat your back, tummy, down the outsides of your legs, up the front, down the insides, up the back. And then bounce into your whole body so that like you're shaking apples off a tree. Really let yourself be loose. And stop. And sense yourself. And just notice, does anything feel different? So I'm noticing a lot of charge in my hands from the hitting. And I'm feeling much more all of one piece. Okay, so let's move back to the presentation. And Anne, you're on.
Okay. So Joel was talking about how the Danes really understood what the muscles in the body and how they corresponded to development and to psychological resources. So what do resources sound and feel like when you express them? Well, certainly it's if you have a sense of confidence in your abilities and you act on them, you feel a competency. So confidence leads to competency. To be able to say things like, my opinion counts, or I can come out with my power, or I know what I need and I can ask for help, or I feel excited following my impulses, or I'm actually comfortable being myself in this group. We help clients to learn or reclaim resources related to the issues they want to change. So look at this picture. Look at this picture.
Sorry.
Well, so here's an organizing principle of Bodynamics, which is mutual connection. And that the knowledge is that we all learn who we are in relationship. And if you look at this mom and this baby, you can see they're both full of themselves and totally connected with each other in a very spontaneous and loving moment. So mutual connection is the capacity to experience ourselves in relationship with others. And it's experienced not just in our minds, but all through our entire body. Mutual connection in Bodynamics answers the question, when I am all of me and you are all of you, can we be in deep connection? And the answer to this question and how it's worked out in childhood leads to the resources people have and the disruptions that we see in the people we're working with and ourselves. We all have them. Okay, so here's another great image of mutual connection. Mutual connection creates resources in the mind and body, in psychological attitudes and abilities. So if you look at this family, each person is delighting being themselves and being with the rest of the family. They're just full of joy. So they're in touch with their inner experience. And they're also in touch with the outer experience of where they are and who they're with. They can reach out, they can express themselves. I'm not sure they have self-awareness right now because they're so into each other, but they certainly are resilient. How do these resources become encoded in the body? We call it imprinting. Muscles become imprinted, reflecting the attunement of the caretakers and how well a new movement or expression or behavior is encouraged and accepted. The child's reaction to these repeated parental responses are imprinted that, okay, this is okay that I can feel and act this way, or, you know, I'm not so sure about this one, or, you know what, I know I'm not supposed to do that. Good enough attunement leads to psychological resources, and the muscle has a very resilient, energetic, flexible quality. It's very responsive. So then there's the other side of it, developmental disruptions. And most of our clients presenting issues of what's going on today result from resources that were either not learned or not accepted at the related developmental age. During childhood, physical, cognitive, emotional development is affected by a lack of attunement. This leads to the developmental disruptions. And to cope with these disruptions, we develop protective responses in ourselves. The problem is, what was initially very adaptive for the times we were growing up becomes unconscious and is the source of adult limitations. It's different than trauma. Trauma is mapped more into the autonomic nervous system. Developmental disruptions are mapped into the voluntary nervous system and the muscles. And as I said before, we all have them. So how do these disruptions become encoded in the body? There's failure of attunement for a particular need or impulse or behavior, whether it's reaching out or saying no. The child has to choose between giving that up to maintain the connection with their caretakers or giving up a connection to themselves to maintain, to the others, to maintain a connection of themselves and their dignity. And of course, when you're very little, that's a really hard thing to do, to give up the connection to the caretakers. So there's a lot of giving up of self in order to stay within the best connection you can get. Developmental disruptions are the consequence. They lead to a lack of expressiveness in the use of the muscle, and it happens in varying degrees, depending on the degree of the misattunement to that ability. There's two ways that misattunement can affect it in a disruption. One is that it leads to a sense of resignation, a real giving up of either ever trying this impulse or behavior, or not even sensing that you have any ability to. There's a lack of responsiveness in the muscles. The other possibility is a rigid holding back related to the ability. And there's a kind of tension in the muscle. It's not flexible in the way that a resourced muscle is. So building competency to resolve the development disruptions, competency is the ability to use your resources appropriately. So what we're doing with people, they're having a new relationship with us. We're supporting them to develop new ways of doing things. And that leads to the confidence that leads to competency. An ease and ability to do things that were harder before.
Okay, so let's look at this. This is a broad overview of the Bodynamic 7 developmental stages. I said earlier, one of the things that Bodynamics did was observe children as they developed through all these stages. And they came to find what was the theme of each stage and what was the basic time frame in which the abilities related to that stage came online. So if we look at the first stage, existence, it goes from the second trimester in the womb to 3 months of age. And the baby is learning whether they have a secure right to exist. Are they wanted for who they are? Are they accepted and loved? Then in the second stage, we may be more familiar with the need stage, the right to have needs and to be satisfied. That goes from 1 month to 18 months, and you see the stages overlap. And these are about very basic needs. The need for food, the need for sleep, the need for caretaking, the need for contact, the need for time alone. Can the child depend on these things happening in a regular enough way so that they know when they sense the impulse, it can be satisfied and they can feel satiated, relaxed, and go on to something else. Third stage, autonomy, the right to be autonomous. So from between 8 months and 2.5 years, the child learns to creep, to crawl, and to walk. They can move away independently from the parents. They usually want to know where the parents are, but they can still do things and follow their impulses. Something looks attractive across the room, they can crawl or walk to it and start playing with it. So is this accepted? Is the environment safe enough so the parents relax and the child is not restrained from following their impulses? And then the will structure, 2 to 4 years. In this country, it's often called the terrible twos. We in the Bodynamics community happen to like this age because the child is really starting to express themselves. They're coming out with their power and their emotions, and they are becoming self-directed. They can make plans, they can follow through with the plans, they can express feelings strongly, and they can be more aware of their environment and have an observing ego of knowing how they feel about what they're doing and how they've affected other people. Okay, if we go on now to fifth stage, love sexuality, 3 to 6 years, the right to feel loving and sexual feelings. So children that age are not actively sexual in the way we normally talk about it, but they are sensual. They're having more sensation in their genitals and in their body, but they're working out their roles as male or female and their relationship to the parents and how they fit in the family. And that is the task for that stage. And when we go on to 6, the opinion stage, 5 to 9 years, this is where the child is more going out into the world and seeing other environments, and they're experiencing different things at school and maybe in other children's houses. People somewhat act differently. The norms and expectations are different, and they're seeing that the way they were told to do things is not the only way. They're forming opinions about that, and they're learning to express them. And the 7th stage, performance solidarity, is about being in groups. So again, often in school or in playing games or in sports, do I have a right to be in a group, to be a full member, or must I always compete and perform to my utmost ability to feel okay? Is it okay for me to help other people to be their best? Can I just be a member of a group at times and not have to perform? So that's what's being worked out in these 7 developmental stages, and we'll talk more about them as we go on. Okay, in addition to the developmental stages, one of the very important things that the Bodynamic founders did, and I think it was important for many theories of psychotherapy, they found that in each stage of development, there could be 3 positions. We've talked about in a little healthy or resource position, when the attunement to the parents is good enough, then the resources that come available in that stage are pretty much learned, and the child goes through and the adult probably doesn't have problems in those areas. But the disruptions that happen vary on a continuum from severe to minor, but they also, there's a difference if they happen early in the developmental stage or later in the developmental stage. And we'll explain that on the next slide. So the early position, if the acceptance or encouragement are absent or negative early in the developmental stage, the child has not learned much of a particular ability, or maybe they didn't learn it at all, and they either give it up or it's not learned. So they're unconscious about the psychological function and ability to use it. And as an adult, this person doesn't sense much impulse in the related muscles, and they don't know how to react in certain situations. An example, we talked about the autonomy stage, which was the third stage from ages 8 months to 2.5 years. In the early autonomy, there's a lack of impulse. The impulses weren't supported enough, and there's not only don't they follow their impulses, but there's an internal blankness, so they may not have many impulses. So they're often waiting around for other people to say what might be a possibility, and they can react to that. Okay, if we go on then to the late position, it's different. There's more holding back. So if the encouragement and acceptance of the abilities coming online was inconsistent later in the stage, then the child learns some of the ability. They have more energy in the muscles. They have some knowledge of being able to react, but then they start to hold it back because it seems to be not okay to express it. And when it's held back, then either they know something and don't express it, or they can express it in a forceful or rigid way. And so again, an example from the autonomy, they know their impulses, but they don't feel safe to follow through on them. So they go from one impulse to another without deepening, and that's how it is for them. Okay, why does this matter? Why did we talk about developmental stages and early and late positions? Well, when you're working with a client who's disrupted early versus late, what's the difference? For the early, there's much more teaching. They don't know about the ability. You have to teach them what it is and when it's important to use it. So to do teaching, you're using a lot of support. You want to create an atmosphere different from what was experienced early on. And so if we go back to autonomy, they don't feel their impulses. We have to help them spend more time centering till they finally feel something and feel it enough so it deepens, and have them support them to act on that. For the late person in the late position, we have to teach them to be more flexible and not hold back and not act in a rigid way. And to do that, you may have to confront the way that they're presently acting and show them the effect of that has on other people, and get them to see that they can do something different, and then support them at that time. So for the autonomy, the late autonomy that had a lot of impulses but didn't follow through on them, jump from one to the other, we work on containing the impulses to stay centered enough so they see, do I want to act on this or don't I? If I don't, I can go to the next one and see, maybe that's the one I want to act on. And finally, for the resource position, people who have abilities, they're mostly able to use them, but there may be other ways they haven't thought that those abilities could be used in their life to an advantage to them and to the people around them.
Joel, I just wanted to add one thing to that.
Yeah.
A lot of people have resources and don't know it. They don't recognize it.
Exactly. I always say, like, if I have a particular problem and another person doesn't have it, can they tell me how to solve it? No, they just don't have it. It's not there. So they don't know they have an impulse, they just use it. Thank you, Ann.
So, okay, so let's do, I want to do a little physical work before we go into will structure more deeply to get a feel for what an early, a late, and a resourced position feels like. So I'm going to move my computer a little further away so you can see a little bit more of me. I'm going to stand up. Let's see. Can you guys see me now?
Just about, yeah.
Should I go push it back further? Okay. Is that good?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to be talking about the shoulders. The shoulders have a lot of holding back or giving up in will structure. But first I want us to use our shoulders in a way, the muscles, so we can actually sense what it feels like to use them. So I'm going to be having you just use your shoulders and roll them back like this a little bit, just to get some energy moving in them, like this. And then I want you to do a little bit of movement like this, just pushing your elbows back. Again, bringing forward and back. And then do it both together, like a little dance. Okay, so now just relax for a minute and just sense what it's like to bring movement and action into your shoulders and your upper back. That there's for me, there's an aliveness there. And it's just that little bit of movement. I can feel energy moving in the muscles. And I actually feel a little bit more present in them. So then I want to show you two other ways that people in will structure can hold that. Okay, so what we want to do is bring the same movement. We're going to bring our shoulders up and forward and in a rigid way. And your chest is going to collapse some, but it's going to be a rigid collapse more like this. And you're going to also put some tension in your jaw, like this. And just feel like it's like, just feel what it's like to hold that much tension in your shoulders. Bring your neck down a little as you're tightening your jaw and hold that and just feel what it's like to hold that. And is this a familiar experience for you? I mean, this is exaggerated, but is what this is doing something that might be familiar to you or to people you know? And then let that go. Loosen it up again. That is what late will structure feels like. There's like this sense of tension and burden, and also you can even tighten your diaphragm. It's like this pressure that goes from here to here that you're just holding on and waiting for something to go wrong. Actually, let me get rid of it. And these are people who are upset a lot and pushing other people away and blaming them if something does go wrong. Okay, how did that feel? Did you notice the difference between when you had a more resourced position? So now we're going to go to, and if you go into the second position, notice if that's familiar, or if you know some people that this might be like how they are. So that position is more like bringing your shoulders forward and down, but as if there's no energy to hold them up. Again, your chest collapses. You have a posture sort of like this. And just stand or sit like this. And notice what this feels like. What this feels like to me is I get tired almost instantly, but I feel like I've just got to do whatever I have to do. So take that off. Come on back. That reflects the position, the more chronic and unconscious position of the early will structure. That very aware of feeling like if there's a problem, it's their fault, and that they're just got to keep going. They just have to keep going. Okay. So how do we work? We develop resources, as we've been saying. Our work is client-centered. We work on the specific behavior that the client wants to change. I'm getting an echo right now that I wasn't getting before.
Yes, your sound is fluctuating. Look at the connections.
Okay. We identify when a person says what they want to work on. We identify how the issue is showing up in their life today. And we ask them to get pretty specific about an example of what they'd like to work on and how it shows up in their life today. And from that, we start to teach new abilities that would help correct the stuck place where they are unconsciously repeating a pattern and they don't know how to change it. We use the muscles that are either held back or given up. We teach the person how to use the muscles, and that's part of the skill building. This also can lead to some emotional expression, which isn't unusual, but it doesn't happen in every session. And we also use the relationship with us as a support to really help somebody as they're changing, that they feel someone is with them in a different way than when they first learned these skills or didn't.
So Anne, I'm going to interrupt for 1 second here. I'm getting some raised hands, and I just want to let people know we will be having a Q&A at the end of this talk. But if you have questions, if you roll your mouse to the bottom of the Zoom screen, you'll see Q&A there, and you can type in your questions there, and then we'll be going through them at the end of the presentation.
Oh, yes. I'm glad we're saying that.
Yeah, so we want your questions, and we will definitely get to as many as we can at the end of the talk.
Yeah. We love answering questions. So the mutual connection, the relationship, is really important in the therapeutic and coaching relationship because, as we've said, all our psychological functioning is learned in relationship through our connection with others or our lack of connection. Now, this is true not just for adults, not just for children, but for everybody. And our presence can help the client feel seen and accepted in the here and now. And this way of connecting can provide an experience that can be reparative and be more likely to be integrated. Just today I was working with somebody who described to me a new behavior that we had been working on, but she wasn't aware of the fact that she had gone to her son and told her son that she was apologizing for the way she had been treating him, that she had been afraid to say to him because she carried so much shame she didn't want to know that she was ashamed. And when she shared that with him, he was able to say thank you, and he thanked her, but he also said, I haven't been the easiest, it hasn't been easy to be supporting me. And there was a new way of being in the relationship with each other. That's a reparative experience for both of them. The affirmative relational messages, this is something that I think is really important. We call it affirmative relational messages, but they are support. They're genuine expressions of the recognition of someone's new skill or expression and how that affects you as the coach or a therapist. For instance, when you tell me what your limits are, I feel more connected to you. I like it when you ask for the help you need. Wow, I really enjoy seeing you express your power. Often offering these affirmative relational messages gives the client something they hear that can really start to replace an old, familiar, internalized story. The fundamental skills for relationships and for mutual connection are what we teach in Bodynamics. Centering, really being able to sense what's going inside of you and feeling your own value. The ability to set limits and boundaries. Grounding, that's being in touch with what's outside of you and still be able to stay in communication and contact. Connectedness, that's an ease in giving and receiving. Containment is being able to manage your own energy while you're holding space for somebody else. And support is something you can give yourself, but you also can give somebody else. I just want to say these are all psychological skills, but they're also body-based skills, and they're easy to learn when they're body-based. So now we're going to take a deeper dive into one developmental stage, will structure. You're on mute, Joel. Joel?
Laura has to do it. Okay.
I got it.
Thank you, Laura. Okay. So I want to get a feel for this stage, the will stage. And as we go through it, here are some questions you can think about and ask yourself that will help you to locate this stage and how it might be appearing in your life. So as we go through it, what about this way of being feels familiar? And which people in my life have I felt this way with? How comfortable am I with being this way? Where in my life today am I showing up like this? And what are the precise body sensations that come with this experience? So these are ways you can begin to locate this in your life today. Okay, the will stage experience. We've talked a little bit about mutual connection for this stage. Can I be powerful in my emotions and actions? Can I be myself, even if different from others, and still be loved and accepted? Can I establish my own authority, make plans, come out with my power? And children at this age are also starting to separate their thinking, their intentions, and their actions. They can be aware if they think of something, they don't have to do it. If they intend for something but don't do it, they're not responsible for that. And they can also observe whether their actions are how they feel about what they did and how other people might feel. And that's the beginning to develop an observing ego. Not just acting, but knowing that they're acting and seeing the results of that. And with all of this, they can make choices and put all their power into action. So here are some will stage questions that you can ask. And a no answer, answering no to these questions can indicate a possible disruption in you or in someone else you know. Can I observe myself and others as I'm communicating? This is the observing ego. Can I own my power and authority and use it constructively? Can I make realistic plans and follow through to take action? Or am I always late or unprepared or overprepared? Can I modulate my own effort and energy so I avoid burnout and avoid overwhelming others? Anne?
Okay. So here we're going to be looking at the qualities of will structure. When they're resourced, they're assertive, they're determined, they have enormous persistence. They can keep going even when other people can't. And they have a lot of power. Their back and shoulders are straight, as we were the opposite of what we were just doing, sort of straight and unburdened. And their buttocks are also full and energized. They have a lot of energy that they can choose to put behind their intentions, their decisions, and their actions in the world. The person is able to use all their power while still being considerate of others and aware of others. They can be altruistic, but they are aware of their limits and don't take on so much that they feel overly burdened. They can follow suggestions without feeling a loss of freedom or self. They are able to plan well because they make time for the unforeseen events that can screw up our schedules. And they can be devoted, patient, critical, humorous, without being sarcastic and resentful. Those are all positive aspects of someone who's got resource and will structure. So then we're going to look at when there's a developmental disruption, what the internal stance is for the early and late position. In the early position, There's a self-sacrificing that they do unconsciously all the time. They have this internal dialogue with themselves that I just got to try harder. I just got to try harder. Someone's got to do it. So I guess it's got to be me. Oh, it's my fault. What did I do this time? I'd like to take a break, but I think that person needs a break way more than I do. So this is that, it can start with altruism, but it ends up really a giving up of the self. The late position has a very different approach. They're very judging. They don't like being told what to do. It's very disruptive for them. If you want something done right, do it yourself. I know you all have heard this from many people. You might even feel that way yourself. It's always your fault. It's very hard for them to see what they do that contributes to whatever the problem is. You're stupid. They might not say that, but they actually might say that also. And the impression they leave with, it's my way or the highway. So if you're going to be with them, you're either with them or against them. Here we have that shoulder position that I had you get in. And this is more what happens to the early will structure. That's the physical posture. But here, they've given up their own sense of power to please and serve others. They've felt crushed or ridiculed or put down or humiliated when using their power. They gain value by taking care of people and are pretty unconscious about any resentment that they might have. They're enduring and they have a sense of being burdened. It's very common for people in both early and late will structure to have a sense of shame, but the early structure is more aware of it, and they have low self-esteem and are very self-critical. They really cannot grasp consequences. This results in difficulties with making choices, with planning, and with time management. They have a lot of difficulty with transitions and changing directions. And if any of you have kids around this age, you know that one. And it's like they carry a weight on their shoulders and their tail is drawn between their legs, and the expression on their face is one of apology and a pained and compassionate look. The late will structure. I was saying to Laura the other day, we just need to have orange hair here. And maybe a red tie.
Careful, Ann.
So they're very judging in varying degrees. There's this strong sense of internal tension and frustration. It's like you have a sense when you're around someone that's got late will structure, you don't want to disagree with them, you don't want to push them because they'll just blow up. They feel like everything's all on them, but they blame everybody else if something goes wrong. They're critical, judgmental, and very stubborn. They're out of touch with any underlying vulnerability. And that's the biggest part of the problem here. They argue with others frequently. They can't relax unless their work is complete, which it never is, because there's always something you can change to make something better. They feel their value comes from doing rather than from being. They're overly optimistic about the time needed or the resource needed to complete a task. And they have tremendous, as we were doing earlier, they have this tremendous upper back and neck tension from holding back their anger and their strong emotions. They have a very judging look in their eyes, analyzing look, they have a tense jaw, and even their resting faces is like irritated. They're irritated, you know it right away. So how does this affect coaches? And how does this, if you have some or if your client has some? So in the early position, the client's going to have a very positive transference with you, so much so that they're going to try and take care of you. They may, for instance, if you need to change your schedule and you give them a time that's really inconvenient for them, they'll take it just to please you. And they'll blame themselves if there's a difficult interaction in the relationship with you. If you, the therapist or coach, have disruptions in early will, you may take way too much responsibility for what's happening in therapy or coaching. You may be working harder than your client is, and you may blame yourself if your client isn't changing. With the late will structure, this is the opposite. They have a negative transference. They tell you about all the people they've worked with and how they were all didn't help, they were losers. And when you hear that, you're going to know that it's going to come up with you, and you need to warn them about it. You know, when we work together, this is an issue we're going to have to work together, because I will disappoint you, you will be angry with me, and we'll need to be able to hang in there and try and work through that. Your client may blame you and judge you, and they may hear what you say in black and white. They also may challenge you a lot. You know, the yes, but school, this is late will. Yeah, but blah, 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 blah. If you have disruptions in late will, you may insist on your client doing things exactly the way you want them to do that, which leaves them feeling like they have no agency or feeling very resentful towards you. You may argue with them, and you may blame them if they're not changing. Does this sound familiar to any of you? I bet it does. So, what do we do to resource will structure? We help them to develop their own authority. That again comes back to centering. We help them to set limits. And that yoke we were holding on to before, we have them get rid of that yoke, all this burden that they're carrying. We need to help them discharge that. If the client seems stuck, you can work with having them walk, change direction, walk, change direction. Because these are the people that walk right into a wall, and it's like they keep going into that wall as if they're supposed to walk through it, as if that's finally going to happen, and they don't realize that they need to change direction and try a different tack. You can also work with them on jumping, because sometimes they're so grounded to the position that they're in that they need to like lighten up and get unstuck that way. The affirmative relationship messages that you can give them are, you know, I like you for who you are, not just for what you do. I'm really pleased that you're taking such good care of yourself. I'm also excited to see you expressing your power here with me, and it's really okay that you're angry with me. Isn't there another slide here?
Yeah, you're not seeing it?
Nope. Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Should have given it a different name.
Okay. So here are the resources we need to do for early and late structure. For the early structure, we need to help them build energy and containment and energy that can express that, so they can express it with full power. We can help them set limits by having them push away, kick away, and give up the role of caretaking others in the belief that they will eventually get what they want. With a late will structure, you need to meet them with their power, with your power, and meet their power with your power, both energetically and emotionally. If you back away, they're going to feel it won't make them feel safe. You need to help them take responsibility for their part in the problems that they're experiencing. They're not going to like it at first. They'll argue with you, but if you have a good relationship and things keep going on, they'll realize that they need to look at what they need to do. And you need to help them get centered and grounded, to sense the responsibility for what they're doing and to see the consequences of their own actions. Now we're going to switch to therapy with will structures. So,
I think this is mine end.
you know, I can't see whose anything is because of the thing on the bottom here. So,
Yeah. Laura, can you extend the bottom of the screen a little more?
it's okay.
Don't know what you're asking me to do.
It's all right. This is yours, Joel.
The A, the J, and the L aren't fully showing.
Ah, I see. No, there's not much I can do about that.
All right. We'll work it out.
It's yours, Joel.
Okay, so what does a session look like? What's the framework of a session? This is a way we can put a lot of the bodynamic power of the system and all of the information into our practice in a regular way. And first, what we do is find out the issue the client wants to change in their life. So we have then a supportive conversation about what's going on in their life lately and what they might want to change, what the change might look like. And so we're working on the issues in the here and now in their life. From the issue itself and from the way they present and what happens in their body as they present, we can identify the relevant developmental stage and whether the disruption is early or late. And we can also, from the issue and the stage, recognize the missing resource and identify the muscle that's related to that resource. Because as we're working on this issue with this person, there'll be a time we want to teach them things that they express with the muscle, or we need to sometimes stretch the muscle so the held back things come out. So we'll be using the muscle expressively as we're helping them to work on the related issue. And as we're doing this, we're also, as we've been saying, creating an affirmative relational context by using the affirmative messages that support a new self-concept and a new competency. Finally, at the end of a session, we often like to do what's called meta-processing. It helps the person integrate the material in a different way. So what does that look like? It might be a therapist or coach saying, how do you feel differently now in your body from when we started working on this issue? How was it to work on this issue here with me today? And how might you be bringing your new competency into your life in the near future? Those are the kinds of things that are often help them to anchor this in a new way.
Okay, so I'm going to turn the spotlight over to myself. And I'm going to talk about yen. This was a session for early will, and hopefully this will help pull some of these ideas that you've been hearing together for you. So Yen is Japanese, and she works for an American high-tech company, very well-known high-tech company, as an analyst. She's very bright. She went to Cal Berkeley and has a lot of intellectual resource. And she's also severely visually impaired, virtually blind. So she has two things that she has to deal with. One is not being able to see, and the other is struggling with the English language in the workplace. She came to me because she'd been put on a performance plan and was at risk of losing her job. And she was depressed and stuck and blaming herself. So I identified this as being a will structure issue that she was struggling with, although there were other issues for her as well. We had some preliminary coaching sessions that were about establishing our relationship, and one of the important things that happened was for me to really help her feel seen around what it's like to be visually impaired and missing all the visual cues that are happening in meetings between people, and people not really making the effort or understanding that they needed to communicate with her in a different way. So she was feeling excluded. She also was struggling with English, as I said. So just being seen around this and understood helped to build our connection. We also talked about the inner critic, and she started to understand when she was in inner critic mode with herself, and that was something that she was doing to herself that could change. So she came into a session one day when something had happened at the office and was really in a shame collapse. If you see this picture to the right here, she was leaned forward as Anne took us through that will structure shame collapse. That was her position, and she was criticizing herself. And when I pointed this out to her, she said, yeah, I feel like my inner critic is an elephant and it's sitting on my shoulders and I can't get it off. So we built a session contract around working to help her get out from under the inner critic so that she could start to take a stand for herself instead of feeling collapsed and bad about herself. So she had special needs that she needed to be accommodated, and that wasn't happening. The missing abilities that I identified for that session were self-support and assertion. So she needed to be able to support herself because she wasn't getting support from her manager or from her peers. The muscles that I decided to work with initially, I worked with a muscle in the foot for grounding in the will structure because she wasn't really seeing what was going on outside of her clearly. She was taking full responsibility for her difficulties on the job and not seeing that she wasn't being treated fairly. Once she got grounded, I then worked with a self-support muscle in the back, the mid-back, the lats. You're a gym rat, you probably work out your lats. Well, this is a really important muscle for feeling self-support. And I did this first by having her activate the muscle. And then once it was activated, I had her lean back in her chair and really feel what it felt like to feel support in her back while I told her, I really support you in getting your needs met around this job situation and taking a stand for yourself. So once she was able to feel the support, we could move into working with the inner critic. And so there's a muscle in the back of the shoulder, and when we made this movement that Anne took us through, that movement helps to release the tension in that muscle or to bring awareness into the muscle in her case. And so I had her making this movement so that she could start to make some space for herself. And she spontaneously started expressing her resentment towards her inner critic, telling it to get off her back, it wasn't helping, and she didn't want to be under it anymore. And she became quite animated, and this actually ended up evolving into anger towards her coworkers. And she started throwing, which also uses that same muscle, throwing things in her fantasy at her coworkers. Of course, she wouldn't do that in real life, but this was somebody who was really out of contact with her strength and her ability to take a stand for herself. So it was important for her to be able to feel this. And while she was doing it, I was telling her, I really like seeing you use your power to take a stand for yourself. I really appreciate that you are angry and you have a right to be. And when she was finished with her emotional expression, I asked her what she was sensing in her body, and she said she felt spacious and tall and light. And her whole body looked so much more relaxed. And I asked her, how was this for you? This is the meta-processing piece of the session. How was it for you to throw off that yoke and feel support? And she said, actually, I can feel my value. I have a right to get my needs met in this organization. And it didn't all happen in one session, but she did start to feel a new possibility for relating to her coworkers in that session. And since then, with more work, she's begun asking for what she needs in a way that she can actually get it.
Yay!
Yeah.
So I'm going to give a different kind of case example for late will structure. And my client is Harry, and he's someone who is an entrepreneur and has a number of people working for him. And he also is part of an entrepreneur support group. And he's married and has children. And what he came in with was because he was really frustrated with everybody at work and at home, and he blamed them for everything going wrong. So his missing abilities were that he didn't have an observing ego about how he might be contributing to this problem. And when you're working with the later positions, and especially when you're working with late will structure, one of the things you have to do is confront them to start to take some awareness of how they're contributing to the problem that they're so upset about. And this is what we did in this session, was a movement in that direction. So the first thing, he came in with so much this internal pressure that I asked him to just, like, if he could just use his body to express some of the pressure that he was feeling. So I had him do this against the back of the couch to really push really hard until we could really feel like it was pushing something off him, and to rotate his shoulders back, to stretch them a little bit, and also to push this way, to push the people away that he thought were really stupid. And I met him emotionally when he was doing this. I'd say, it's really hard, you're really frustrated, you're so tired of these people not showing up the way you need them to show up. But this was just like the warm-up for the session, because if we had ended there, we would have just kept him in his late will structure. So once he got that out and he saw that I was really with him, and he started to stretch some of these muscles, which had been in this rigid position of just tension, tension, tension. It's hard for me to go into that position myself because it hurts. I then started to talk about how hard this was for him, and that he really feels it's all on him and he feels really alone. And he said to me, "This is the story of my life." So tell me about that. So he was the oldest of 4 children of 2 alcoholic parents. And he was the one that was supposed to take care of everything. Of course, he couldn't do that, but he got into this late will behavior of feeling like he was supposed to and trying. And if anybody screwed up, it was on him, but he would blame them. I mean, it just was this terrible upbringing that made him feel this incredible pressure and also fury at how incompetent the people were around him. And that's what he was taking into every group situation he was in, whether it was his own company or a support group or at home. So I asked him to use the latissimus, just to sense that latissimus. And he couldn't really, because he wasn't that in touch with his body. So I said, okay, if I put my hand on your middle back, and I put my hand there, and I said to him, "Can you sense my hand there holding your back?" He said, "Yeah, I can." I said, "Can you just let yourself lean into that a little bit?" And he was able to lean into it a little more, relax a little bit more. And then I said to him, "I really get how hard it is for you, how really hard it is for you to feel like it's all on you and you're just by yourself." And tears started to come to his eyes, because underneath all this will structure behavior was the sense of aloneness and the vulnerability that he wasn't sensing and that other people couldn't sense either. So I asked him to, when we were able to make contact that way, I asked him to use his big toe to ground this into the reality of what was happening between us right then, that someone was with him and really listening to how hard it was for him. And when he was using the big toe, he was also starting to use one of the centering muscles for will structure. And we really stayed with this for a while. And I told him I was really moved by seeing how vulnerable he was. And he started to be able to come up with, wow, I think it's probably been really hard for people to know this about me because I'm always so angry. And I said, yeah, Harry, I think it is hard for people to know that about you. So he started to develop some self-awareness of what he was doing that was making this hard for himself. And also with compassion, that it came from a situation that was impossible for him when he was younger. So in the meta-processing, I just asked him to think about what it might be like to share this part of himself. It's something like what I said my client earlier did when she told her son that she had pulled away from him because she felt ashamed of not being able to help him. So that was the beginning for him of being able to relax a little bit into what he had been covering, both for himself and for everybody else to know about him, is that he was vulnerable. Okay.
Okay, so you're going to be getting an email that contains a lot of information about upcoming learning opportunities. I'm not going to go through it in detail right this minute, but I did want to let you know that that will be coming. I'll come back to this slide in a moment, but we're going to move to Q&A now. So if you have questions, I encourage you to bring your mouse down so that you can see the Q&A icon and click on that, and then you can type your questions in there and we will take questions and answer them for the remaining time. So right now, I see a couple of questions here. The first question, and Anne and Joel, you guys can decide who's going to take this one. Is the fascia studied with Bodynamics?
Well, it's not studied. I mean, we understand the fascia as something that happens, that often happens in the womb. That's because that's where the movement comes in the womb. And it's also, the fascia is also part of what gets disrupted in shock trauma. But that's not what we're teaching in this course. We're really working with the muscles.
Yes, the imprints, the psychological print is in the muscle. There's some from the womb that comes into the fascia more. And it's often advised after you do the psychological work and free the muscle and it's more energized, that's a very good time to work on the fascia.
Mm-hmm.
So here we have another question. Let's see. Do you see situations where clients show indication of both early and late positions? This is a good question, of the same structure.
Oh, yeah.
If so, why would that be, and how do you work with it?
Well, of course we do. And the reason we do is because we're never 100% anything. And human beings are very, very complex. So yes, there could be someone who has some of the, maybe has a good center in their will structure, but not be able to follow through, not be able to change direction, not be able to set limits. So they could be resourced there. They could have, be really holding back, setting limits, and they could be really not knowing when it's time to change direction. Would you add anything to that, Joel?
Yes, and that there are certain situations in which some people might tend to act more early or tend to act more late. So it's not absolute either, and we could work on those separately with them.
And the man I was just talking about, Harry, was like his late will structure was covering up the early collapse. So that's not unusual either, that when you start to work with someone's late position in a developmental stage, what starts to emerge is a collapse that was underneath, that they were using a lot of tension to try and hold themselves together.
So here's a comment from somebody. I appreciate this information. Will there be an upcoming workshop or more detailed information? So we're going to cover that in a few minutes, but I think it could be, oh good, here's another question. Would you ever bring other branches of therapy works, parts or shadow, for example, into the Bodynamic session? I'd like to start answering this question, and then I'll hand it over to you guys. So I do use parts work with my clients. That parts work comes from internal family systems, for those of you who don't know. And it's a verbal way of working to be in relationship with the different voices that are parts of ourselves. And the client who I was talking about, Yin, when we did the inner critic work, we actually were using parts work, IFS work, so that she could start to come into a relationship with her inner critic and see it not just as something that was in her way, but also as a part of her that she was trying to take care of her. So I wanted to bring that piece in because I do parts work. Anne and Joel, do you want to talk about other branches of therapies such as shadow work that you bring into Bodynamic sessions?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about it. As we said at the beginning, all of us have a Neo-Reichian background, and so we may be more comfortable with working with emotion, even strong emotion, than the average person. So we allowed that, and we also are aware that there's a lot of emphasis on PTSD, on trauma, and it's probably obvious that what we've been talking about today is not traumatic, but is more like the drip, drip, drip of everyday childhood development. And it's encoded in the voluntary nervous system, whereas traumatic experience is encoded in the autonomic nervous system. So we are more comfortable with emotion than a lot of people are.
Okay, and what I would say is I think we use all the tools in our toolbox.
Yes.
When you've been around for a while, as all of us have been, we have a lot of different skills that we bring to whatever practice we're doing. And I wouldn't call what I do parts work, but I certainly do different ego aspects of people. And I really work with people for building resources in ways and building resources like an aspect of a person that's undeveloped. And I certainly work a lot with the internal dialogues that people carry around inside of themselves. And I also would say that, I have a lot of skills that are not parts work, but work with the parts in different ways. EMDR is one of those skills. And certainly the attachment work that I've studied for a long time is working with undeveloped parts of the self and the words that come with them and the feelings that come with them. So yes, parts work is something that people do, but when you have a lot of tools and you've been working for a long time, you've got a lot in your toolbox.
Yeah, and what I want to build on what Ann just said is I think one of the key points to take away from this presentation is that the training that Ann and Joel have created, is meant to be built on top of what your skills already are. So that's one of the reasons why I think it's especially effective, not just for coaches, but for therapists, but for coaches as well. I use parts work, I use focusing, I use what I call integral unfoldment, which is more of an unfolding and presence-based sort of coaching practice. And so I'm finding ways to weave the Bodynamic work into the other work that I do. And I think my clients appreciate that. So you can become quite skillful in using Bodynamics work as something that you do in addition to what you're already doing. It's not meant to take the place of what you're doing, but rather to bring in a somatic piece that's really precise and powerful.
Yeah. I mean, and I think what Bodynamics does better than a lot of other body psychotherapies is the precision that we use and the way we can really hone down to what is needed. But the other thing is that people are really complex. So the more skills you have, the better you're going to be able to serve anybody, no matter what you're doing.
So I just had a request from somebody that they wanted to be able to see all of us. And so let me just point out that if you go up to the top of your screen and go and click on where it says gallery view and change it to speaker view, you can see all three of us at the same time. Okay, here's another question. Will the PowerPoint be available after this webinar? No, the PowerPoint won't be available, but the presentation will be. So the recording will be available. And somebody's asking, can a physical training coach use Bodynamic strategies with their clients? That's an interesting question.
What's the question again?
Can a physical training coach, so a personal trainer?
Oh yeah. I mean, because it's going to, when someone's body, when they're not able to move in a way that they are interested in moving in, or they have chronic places where their body is breaking down, that can often be related to a psychological function. So when you learn the psychological functions of the muscles, you can help them understand that this is related to not just their body being strange or them being strange, but there's a psychological history that's held in the muscle that affects how people move. And as a matter of fact, one of the founders of Bodynamics, Eric Jarlnes, really worked with both the Olympic chess team in Denmark and also the sprinters to help them run better and to help them work better on the chess team by teaching them how to use their bodies differently.
Yeah, so you might end up referring people to a therapist or coach if the issue was such that they couldn't move past it, but helping them understand what it's about could be a useful first step.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we have a question. When you use the description of early or late, what do you mean? My guess is that there are developmental stages, for example, 1 to 2 years old, and early is then closer to 1 and late is closer to 2. Is that right?
No, They might have turned in late to the webinar a little late, but there are early developmental times: existence, need, autonomy, will, for instance. But within each developmental stage or time period, there's a response that can be either early, which is the resignation or given up, or late, which is more the holding back, or resourced, which we all, we love it when people are resourced. And a lot of my work is really letting people understand and own their resources. So is that clear enough to the person who was asking that question? Is that what we mean by early and late?
Yes, each stage has an early and late position and a resource position.
Every stage. And actually every muscle, we have global descriptions of somebody, for instance, being in will structure has certain issues that they're working with. But not every muscle in will structure is in late if they're late, or in early if they're early. There's always going to be some resource, and there'll always be some combination of early and late.
Yeah, so if this isn't clear, what I want to say is that this particular webinar is being followed up by a series of webinars where you will have the opportunity to bring in case studies and get feedback on those case studies, and how you might work with your clients differently. And early and late would certainly be one of the things that would be considered. So the training that Ann and Joel are, let me actually move to the next slide so we can start to talk about what's coming up next. So hopefully I'm sharing the right slide here.
That's Q&A.
Good. All right. So there will be a link to replay this experience. There will be a link also to register for the follow-up webinar where you can get supervision sessions. You'll be able to sign up for a mailing list to learn about upcoming experiential workshops and trainings. And so let me talk a little bit about the trainings, and then Ann and Joel, you can add on to whatever I have to say. So there will be evening and day-long introductory workshops in February and March. So if you want to just get a little taste.
That's in Northern California.
That's in Northern California. So if you're there, you might consider coming to those. There's also a training in Northern California that starts in April, and a Boston training that starts in May, and other locations where trainings are coming up. And before we go into a little bit more description of the trainings, I'll just mention that I'm going to be leading a workshop in Northern California on centering, March 16th and 17th, and then there will be a series of other workshops after that. And you can always learn more at bodynamicusa.com, and there's also an international site, bodynamic.com, where you can learn more. But Ann and Joel, I think it would be good for you to talk a little bit about what happens in the training.
Okay, so we go over the developmental stages. We teach people what the themes are. It's a lot of experiential work. Most of the didactic work and the cognitive work we ask you to do outside so we can integrate it with the experiential work inside the training. We teach you about 5 or 6 muscles average for each developmental time period. And we also have you try out those movements, try out those muscles, and see what it feels like in your own body. We work with especially centering, grounding, and support for each stage. And what we're going to be doing also is teaching you, we will do demonstration sessions, so you'll see what it's like to give a session. But we're also going to have you do practice sessions so you see what it's like to use that material.
Yeah. Yes, we help you to experience each structure in your body, and then as a group identify and split up into subgroups that are more early, more late, or more resource. So you see and hear from other trainees what it's like for them. So you get a much broader picture of it right up front, and you can see it in the people as they talk about it. And as Anne was saying, each of you will, for each structure, will give, receive, and observe a practice session that we're supervising. So you're learning to put the knowledge into practice right there. And our hope is that then you can identify particular kinds of issues that come up in your own practice, and in those sessions, use the bodynamic strength of the work of the strength of the bodynamic work.
So there also will be study groups during the training. So you'll see us for 4 or 5 days, and then have study groups in between to help integrate.
Yeah, the training is in about 5 modules of 4 days, and the study groups between. So there's a real connection between trainees, and although we focus most on the learning, there's a lot of growth from the experiences in the training itself.
So let me ask, if people have questions after this webinar and want to get in touch with you, questions about the training perhaps, how might they be able to make contact? Am I mute?
No, I heard you.
No.
Okay.
Oh, okay. It's just that people still aren't seeing all 3 of us. That's the message we just got. Something's happening in the screen that we're not.
That's something that they have control over by clicking on the top. But I can share my screen, and then they'll see all 3 of you on my screen. So why don't I do that?
And someone else is saying they can see all 3 of us. So, okay. All right. So I'm sorry, Laura. What was the question?
I don't think I solved the problem just now, so I'm going to unshare. Okay. The question was, how can people be in contact about, if they, let's say they have some questions about the training and they aren't ready to register yet, who can they contact? Or let's say they have questions about the experiential workshop that I'm leading. How do they reach out?
Well, they can contact us through bodynamicusa.com. And that has all our contact information there.
Okay.
And is there email addresses on the website for Anne and myself, and for another colleague, Akash? Those addresses are on the website.
Okay, so you'll be getting that in email, and I think we should put your email addresses in the email that's going out. You're going to be getting a follow-up email, everyone, after this webinar, and we should put the email addresses there too.
Right, and also, our office phone numbers too. That's fine. I'm happy to give those out. And
okay, well,
if people want to contact you, we need to put that in the email also.
Let's put that in the email too.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you found this useful and informative and enjoyable. I know I did. So we hope to see and hear from more of you, and I hope you have a lovely evening, and God bless.
Thank you, everybody.
You all. Bye.
Bye.